The night was cold, with a faint drizzle tapping rhythmically against the window panes. I sat in our dimly lit living room, the soft hum of the television in the background, while my wife, Anna, sat across from me, scrolling through her phone. We had been married for 6 years, and though I cherished our life together, I couldn't ignore the growing distance between us. Conversations that once flowed effortlessly now felt strained, and her laughter, the kind that used to fill every corner of our home, had grown scarce. At first, I chalked it up to the routine of life. Work, bills, responsibilities, surely everyone faces this lull eventually. But lately, Anna had been more withdrawn, spending hours on her phone or disappearing into the other room with vague excuses about needing space. I tried not to overthink it, tried to convince myself it was just a phase. But deep down, an unsettling feeling began to creep in, whispering doubts I didn't want to confront. It started with small things, the way she'd quickly lock her phone when I entered the room, the hushed tones of her late-night calls, her sudden interest in nights out with the girls, which had never been a priority before. I didn't want to be the paranoid husband, so I gave her the benefit of the doubt. After all, trust was the foundation of our relationship, or so I believed. But one evening, as I walked past our bedroom, I overheard her speaking on the phone. Her voice was soft, almost playful, a tone I hadn't heard in months. The words she spoke stopped me in my tracks. "It's been so long," she whispered, a hint of excitement in her voice. "I've missed talking to you." My heart sank. I wanted to burst into the room, demand answers, but instead, I stood frozen, my mind racing. Who was she talking to? And why did it sound so intimate? Over the next few days, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I started paying closer attention. Her sudden enthusiasm for dressing up when going out, the way she'd smile at her phone, like a teenager with a crush. And then, one night, I saw the name. Her phone lit up on the kitchen counter while she was in the shower. I glanced over, telling myself it was nothing. But there it was. Mark. A name from her past, someone she had dated briefly before we met. I remembered her mentioning him in passing years ago, describing him as a fun fling that didn't work out. So why was he calling her now? I didn't touch her phone. I didn't need to. The seed of doubt had already been planted, and it was growing fast. The following week, I decided to confront her. "Who's Mark?" I asked casually over dinner, trying to gauge her reaction. Anna's fork paused mid-air, her expression momentarily flickering with something I couldn't quite place. Guilt? Surprise? "Oh, just an old friend," she said, brushing it off. "We caught up recently. Nothing major." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to trust that this was just a harmless reconnection. But her evasive tone told me otherwise. That night, I made a decision I never thought I'd make. I installed a tracking app on her phone. It wasn't a proud moment, but I needed to know the truth. If she had nothing to hide, then I'd be the one to apologize for doubting her. But if my suspicions were correct... The next evening, she told me she was meeting her friends for dinner. I nodded, forcing a smile, and waited until she left. Then I opened the app and saw her location. My stomach churned as I watched the little dot move across the map. Not to the restaurant she had mentioned, but to a small boutique hotel on the other side of town. My hands trembled as I grabbed my car keys and drove there. The rain had picked up, and the windshield wipers struggled to keep up with the downpour. My mind raced with every possible scenario, each more painful than the last. By the time I arrived, I was soaked to the bone, but the sight in front of me made me forget the cold. Through the lobby's glass doors, I saw her. She was laughing, her hand resting lightly on the arm of a man I immediately recognized from old photos. Mark. They were too close, their body language unmistakable. I watched as they walked toward the elevator, the doors closing behind them. A mixture of anger, heartbreak, and disbelief surged through me. I stood there, rain pouring down around me, feeling like the ground had been ripped out from under my feet. This was the woman I had loved, the woman I had trusted with my heart. And now, here she was, with someone she had assured me was just an old friend. I didn't go inside. I didn't confront her. Not then. Instead, I drove home. My mind, a whirlwind of emotions. I needed time to think, to process what I had seen. The next morning, Anna returned home as if nothing had happened. She greeted me with a smile, kissed me on the cheek, and went about her day as though everything was normal. Months passed, and the echoes of Anna's betrayal lingered like a stubborn storm cloud. The divorce had been finalized, and the house we once shared now stood hollow, stripped of the memories that once defined it. I had moved into a smaller apartment, on the outskirts of town, a quiet, modest space where I could rebuild my life in solitude. In the beginning, the emptiness was unbearable. Waking up to silence, eating meals alone, and coming home to an empty apartment felt like punishment. But with time, the pain began to dull, replaced by a quiet determination to find myself again. I threw myself into work, joined a gym, and even started attending a weekly support group for people recovering from infidelity. Hearing others share their stories reminded me that I wasn't alone and that healing was possible. One evening, as I was leaving the support group, an older gentleman named Gerald stopped me. His story had been one of the most heartbreaking I'd heard. His wife of 40 years had left him for his best friend, but his demeanor was one of calm acceptance. "Revenge isn't what you think it is," he said, his voice steady. "It's not about making them suffer. It's about living a life so full, so rich, that their betrayal becomes nothing more than a footnote in your story." Those words stayed with me, replaying in my mind like a mantra. I realized that I had spent so much time focused on Anna's betrayal that I had forgotten to focus on myself. If I was going to truly move forward, I needed to let go of the bitterness that was chaining me to the past. A year later, my life looked completely different. I had been promoted at work, turning my focus and energy into something productive. I had picked up old hobbies, woodworking, hiking, and even playing guitar, which had once been a passion of mine. Slowly but surely, I was rediscovering the person I had been before Anna entered my life. One day, while browsing through a local bookstore, I met someone, Sophie. She was browsing the same shelf, her fingers tracing the spines of books as she searched for something to catch her eye. We struck up a conversation about a shared favorite author, and before I knew it, we were exchanging numbers. Sophie was everything Anna wasn't: kind, genuine, and refreshingly honest. She had a warmth about her that drew people in, and for the first time in years, I found myself smiling without effort. We started seeing each other casually, and though I was cautious, I couldn't deny the growing connection between us. One evening, as we sat on the porch of her small cottage, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Sophie turned to me and said, "You seem like someone who's been through a lot, but you don't carry it with you, not in a way that weighs you down." Her words struck a chord. She was right. I had been through hell, but I had come out the other side stronger, wiser, and more certain of what I wanted in life. Anna's betrayal had broken me, but it had also taught me invaluable lessons about resilience, self-worth, and the importance of surrounding myself with people who truly valued me. One day, out of the blue, I received an email from Anna. It was brief, almost hesitant, as if she wasn't sure if she should send it. She apologized for everything, for the lies, the betrayal, and the pain she had caused. She admitted that her relationship with Mark had fallen apart quickly and that she had been left with nothing but regret. She asked for my forgiveness, though. She acknowledged that she didn't deserve it. I stared at the email for a long time, torn between anger and pity. But in the end, I replied with a simple message. "I've moved on. I hope you find peace." And I meant it. Forgiveness wasn't about absolving her of guilt. It was about freeing myself from the burden of carrying her actions with me. As I hit send, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. Anna's chapter in my life was finally closed, and I was ready to fully embrace the future, a future where I was no longer defined by the pain of the past. Sitting beside Sophie that evening, watching the stars appear one by one in the night sky, I realized that Gerald had been right all along. Revenge wasn't about making Anna pay for what she had done. My greatest revenge was living a life of happiness, fulfillment, and love, a life where her betrayal was nothing more than a distant memory. Sophie and I continued to build a life that felt like a breath of fresh air. With every shared moment, whether it was cooking dinner together, laughing at old movies, or sitting in companionable silence, I felt the weight of my past fade further into the background. It wasn't erased, but it was no longer a shadow looming over me. A year after that unexpected cafe meeting with Anna, Sophie and I decided to host a small gathering at our home. It was a celebration of sorts, of love, of growth, of the simple joys that made life meaningful. Friends and family filled the space, their laughter and warmth transforming our house into a haven of connection. As I moved through the crowd, offering drinks and sharing stories, I caught Sophie talking to my younger brother, Ethan. Her smile was radiant, and the way she leaned in to listen made it clear she was as invested in my family as she was in me. It was a sight that filled me with an inexplicable sense of contentment. Later that evening, as the last guests trickled out, Sophie and I sat on the couch, the remnants of the party scattered around us. She leaned her head on my shoulder, and I felt the calm that only her presence could bring. "This feels good," she murmured, her voice soft and steady. "It does," I agreed, pressing a kiss to her hair. "It feels like home." Not long after, Sophie and I embarked on a new adventure together, one that neither of us had fully anticipated. We decided to start our own consulting business, blending our complementary skills into a shared vision. The process was challenging but rewarding, and it brought us even closer as partners. Through it all, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. The betrayal I once thought would break me had instead forged me into someone stronger, more self-aware, and deeply appreciative of the life I was building. It had taught me resilience and the importance of surrounding myself with people who truly valued me. One evening, as we worked late into the night on a client proposal, Sophie paused, looking at me with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever think about the life you almost had? With Anna?" Her question didn't sting like it might have once. Instead, I considered it thoughtfully, my gaze steady. "I think about it sometimes," I admitted. Not with regret, though. It's more like a distant memory of someone I used to be. She smiled, her eyes warm. "I like who you've become." "I do too," I said, the words filled with quiet certainty. Years passed, and our lives continued to evolve. Sophie and I got married in a simple ceremony surrounded by those we loved most. We traveled the world, celebrated milestones, and faced challenges together with the unwavering support that had become the foundation of our relationship. Every now and then, I'd cross paths with someone from my past, like Anna or her family. The encounters were always cordial, but they reminded me of how far I'd come. I no longer felt bitterness or anger, only a quiet gratitude for the lessons learned and the path that had led me to where I was. Looking back, I realized that life's greatest twists and turns often come when we least expect them. But it's not the challenges themselves that define us. It's how we rise from them, how we choose to write the chapters that follow. And as I stood on the balcony of our home one evening, Sophie by my side, and the future stretching out before us, I knew one thing with absolute clarity. This was the story I was meant to live, and it was only just beginning. The years that followed were a testament to the unpredictable beauty of life. Sophie and I continued to grow. not just as a couple, but as individuals who found strength in each other's unwavering support. Our consulting business flourished, becoming a beacon of innovation and collaboration in our field. The work wasn't just about building a business. It was about creating something meaningful together. One of the most profound moments of our journey came during a quiet evening, at home. Sophie and I were sitting on the floor of our living room, surrounded by photo albums and memories. The soft hum of music played in the background as we laughed at our own awkward pictures from years gone by. "Do you think our kids will think we were cool?" Sophie asked, her eyes sparkling with mischief. I laughed, leaning back against the couch. "I think they'll roll their eyes at us, but secretly, they'll think we're the coolest people they know." Her gaze softened, and a smile played at her lips. "Speaking of kids," she began, her voice tentative but filled with a hopeful undertone. I raised an eyebrow, my heart skipping a beat. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" She nodded, her cheeks tinged with a blush. "I've been thinking about it a lot lately. I think I'm ready. Ready to start a family with you." The words settled over me like a gentle wave, washing away any lingering doubts or fears. I reached for her hand, holding it tightly. "Sophie, there's nothing I'd love more." The months that followed were a whirlwind of excitement and anticipation. Sophie and I prepared for the arrival of our first child, pouring our love and energy into creating a home that would nurture not just our child, but the life we were building together. When our daughter Lily was born, it felt like the universe had gifted us a new beginning, a symbol of everything we had overcome and the life we were creating anew. Holding her in my arms for the first time, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Gratitude for Sophie, for the lessons of the past, and for the future that now felt limitless. Life with Lily brought its own set of challenges and joys. Sleepless nights were balanced by the pure magic of watching her grow, her first steps, her first words, and the unfiltered joy she brought into our lives. She became the heart of our home, a constant reminder of the love and resilience that had brought us to this point. One evening, as I tucked Lily into bed, she looked up at me with wide, curious eyes. "Daddy," she said, her voice small but filled with wonder, "what's your favorite story?" I smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "That's an easy one," I said. "It's the story of how I found the most important people in my life, you and your mom." Her little face lit up with a smile, and she hugged her teddy bear tightly. "That's a good story, Daddy." "It is," I agreed, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "And it's one I'll keep telling you, forever." As the years passed, our family grew, our lives deepened, and the story of who we were became more richly layered. Sophie and I often reflected on the twists and turns that had brought us together, marveling at the resilience of the human heart and the capacity for love to heal and transform. In the end, the betrayal that once shattered me had become a distant memory, a part of my story but not the defining chapter. What defined me was the love I had found, the life I had built, and the family that now surrounded me. And as I sat on our porch one evening, watching the sunset with Sophie by my side and Lily playing in the yard, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. This was the life I had fought for, the happiness I had earned, and the love I would cherish forever. The story of betrayal had been rewritten into a story of hope, resilience, and endless possibility. And I knew, deep in my heart, that this was the greatest story I could ever live. As life unfolded, its rhythm steady yet unpredictable, I found myself appreciating the quieter moments even more. Watching Lily chase butterflies in the yard, hearing her laugh echo through the house, or catching Sophie humming to herself as she cooked. It all reminded me of how far we had come. But life, as always, had its surprises. One day, while organizing some old files in my home office, I stumbled across a letter, folded and tucked away in the corner of a drawer I rarely opened. It was addressed to me, but the handwriting wasn't familiar. My curiosity piqued. I opened it, my breath catching as I read the first few lines. The letter was from Julia. Years had passed since the chaos of our separation, and I hadn't heard a word from her since the divorce was finalized. Seeing her name written so plainly on the paper stirred a mixture of emotions, none of which I could easily categorize. The letter began with an apology. Julia wrote about the mistakes she had made, the pain she had caused, and how she had spent years reflecting on her choices. She admitted that at the time she didn't fully understand the gravity of her actions or the depth of the love she had taken for granted. She also revealed something unexpected. Her life had taken a difficult turn. After our divorce, the relationship with her coworker had crumbled under the weight of its own deception. She had tried to rebuild her life, but it hadn't been easy. She mentioned struggling to find stability and, in her own words, never quite finding the peace I hoped for. The letter wasn't an attempt to rekindle anything. She made that clear. Instead, it was her way of seeking closure, of acknowledging her wrongs and perhaps hoping for a semblance of forgiveness. She ended the letter with a wish for my happiness and a quiet gratitude that I had moved on to a better life. I sat there for a long time, the letter resting in my lap, my mind swimming with thoughts. The old wounds had long since healed, but reading Julia's words brought back echoes of a time when I had felt utterly broken. Yet instead of anger or resentment, I felt compassion. That evening, I shared the letter with Sophie. We sat together on the couch, her hand resting on mine. As I explained what it contained, Sophie listened quietly, her expression thoughtful. "What are you feeling?" she asked gently when I finished. I took a deep breath, considering her question. I think I feel grateful. Grateful that I've moved on, that I found you, that we have this life together. And maybe I feel a little sorry for her too." Sophie nodded, her thumb brushing over the back of my hand. "You're a good man," she said softly, "and that's why I fell in love with you." Her words warmed me, reaffirming what I already knew, that the life we had built was rooted in trust, respect, and an unshakable love. A few weeks later, I wrote Julia a short reply. I told her that I had received her letter and appreciated the courage it must have taken to write it. I didn't delve into the past or reopen old wounds, but I wished her peace and happiness just as she had wished for me. It felt like the right thing to do. A final chapter closed with grace. Life continued, as it always does. But there was a lightness in my heart now, a sense of resolution. The past, once a heavy weight, had finally settled into a place where it no longer defined me. It was part of my story, but it wasn't my story. My story was here, in the laughter of my daughter, the warmth of my wife's embrace, and the quiet joy of a life well lived. And that, I realized, was more than enough. Months passed, and life embraced its familiar rhythm once more. Sophie and I were thriving in the simplicity and joy of our shared existence, raising Lily, tending to the home, and making memories that mattered. But as life so often does, it threw us a curveball, a challenge that would test not only our strength as individuals, but also the bond we had so carefully cultivated. It began with a phone call late one evening. Sophie was in the kitchen tidying up after dinner, humming one of her favorite tunes, while I was helping Lily with a particularly tricky puzzle in the living room. The ringtone broke the calm, and Sophie wiped her hands on a towel before picking up the phone. Her cheerful, "Hello?" soon faded into a more serious tone. I watched her from across the room, her brow furrowing as she listened intently. When she glanced my way, her face carried an expression I hadn't seen in a long time. concern mixed with something she couldn't yet put into words. After a brief conversation, she hung up and walked over to me, her steps slow and deliberate. Who was? That? I asked, setting the puzzle piece down and giving her my full attention. It was Julia, Sophie said, her voice measured. I blinked in surprise. Julia hadn't been part of our lives since her letter, and I hadn't expected her to ever reach out. Again. What did she say? Sophie hesitated, sitting down beside me. She's not doing well. She's facing some serious health issues and doesn't have much support. She reached out because she didn't know who else to call. The room fell silent except for the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. I could feel Lily's curious eyes on us as she waited for me to finish the puzzle. I gave her a reassuring smile and told her to keep going without me before turning my attention back to Sophie. What kind of health issues? I asked, my voice low. She didn't go into detail, but it sounds serious, Sophie replied. She said she wasn't asking for money or anything like that. She said she felt lost and needed to talk to someone who once cared about her. The weight of the situation pressed down on me. Julia had been a pivotal figure in my past, her betrayal reshaping the course of my life. But despite everything, she had also been someone I loved deeply at one point. Her reaching out now, in a moment of vulnerability, stirred conflicting emotions within me. What do you think? Sophie asked, her gaze searching mine. I took a deep breath, running a hand through my hair. I don't know. Part of me feels like I owe her nothing. But another part of me can't just ignore someone in need. Sophie nodded, her expression understanding. You have a big heart, you know that? That's one of the things I love about you. Her words gave me clarity. I wasn't the man I used to be, the man consumed by anger and bitterness. I had grown, and with that growth came a sense of responsibility, not just to myself, but to the person I wanted to be. I'll call her, I said finally, just to see how I can help. The conversation with Julia was brief but heavy. She revealed that she had been diagnosed with a chronic illness that had left her unable to work. Her savings were gone, and the few relationships she had left had crumbled. She wasn't asking for forgiveness or charity. She simply needed someone to talk to, someone who could remind her of better days. I agreed to meet her in a public place with Sophie's full support. Sitting across from Julia in a small cafe, I barely recognized her. The confident, vibrant woman I had once known was now a shadow of herself, her eyes tired, her frame frail. "Thank you for coming," she said softly, her voice barely above, a whisper. I nodded, unsure of what to say. The silence stretched between us before she spoke again, her hands trembling as she clutched her cup of tea. "I know I have no right to ask anything of you," she began, her voice cracking. "But I needed to say, I'm sorry, truly sorry, for everything." Her words, though heartfelt, felt unnecessary. I had already moved past the pain she had caused, but seeing her like this, a woman who had lost so much, filled me with a sense of compassion I hadn't expected. "You don't need to apologize again," I said gently. "What's done is done. What matters now is what you need." Her eyes welled with tears, and she looked away, ashamed. "I don't know," she admitted. "I don't know what I need." In that moment, I realized that this wasn't just about Julia. It was about who I had become. Someone who could offer kindness even when it wasn't owed. Someone who could let go of the past to help another human being. I didn't have all the answers, but I knew one thing for certain. Life had given me the chance to rise above, to be the person I wished I had been in my darkest moments. And for that, I was grateful. Over the next few weeks, I found myself offering Julia small acts of support. It wasn't anything grand or overwhelming, just enough to help her find her footing. I connected her with local resources, helped her navigate some medical paperwork, and occasionally checked in to make sure she wasn't entirely alone. Sophie, ever my anchor, was understanding and even encouraging, reminding me that offering compassion didn't mean reopening old wounds. Julia was hesitant at first, as if she feared my kindness came with conditions. But as time passed, she seemed to accept that this wasn't about repayment or reconciliation. It was simply about decency. One afternoon, as I sat with Sophie in the backyard watching Lily chase bubbles under the golden rays of the setting sun, Sophie turned to me with that knowing smile of hers. "You know," she began, her voice soft, "I think this was the closure you didn't even realize you needed." I tilted my head, curious. Closure? I thought I'd already made peace with everything. "You made peace with the betrayal," Sophie said thoughtfully. "But this, helping her, showing her kindness even after everything, that's you, reclaiming your own narrative. It's not just about her. It's about you deciding the kind of man you want to be." Her words resonated deeply. Sophie had a way of seeing through to the core of things, of articulating what I couldn't quite put into words myself. She was right. This wasn't about Julia. It wasn't about what she had done or what she needed. It was about me proving, to myself more than anyone else, that I had grown. That I wasn't defined by the pain of the past, but by the choices I made now. One day, Julia called me to let me know that she had been approved for a long-term care program and found a small, subsidized apartment close to her treatment center. She sounded lighter, as if the weight she had been carrying was beginning to lift. I can't thank you enough," she said, her voice breaking over the phone. "You didn't have to do any of this. After everything, I wouldn't have blamed you if you turned your back on me." I paused, glancing out the window at the life I had built, a life filled with love, laughter, and second chances. "Maybe I didn't have to," I replied. "But that doesn't mean I shouldn't. We all need help sometimes, Julia." There was silence on the other end before she said, "You're a better person than I deserve." "It's not about what you deserve," I said quietly. "It's about who I choose to be." As time went on, Julia faded back into the background of my life, not because of animosity or avoidance, but because her chapter in my story had reached its natural conclusion. I wished her well and meant it, but my focus remained where it belonged, on the family and future I was building with Sophie and Lily. One evening, as I tucked Lily into bed, she looked up at me with her wide, curious eyes. "Daddy," she asked, "why do you always help people even when they're not nice?" Her question took me by surprise, but after a moment I smiled. "Because, sweetheart, being kind isn't about what other people do. It's about who we are. And I want us to be the kind of people who make the world a little better, even if it's just one small act at a time." She seemed to think about this for a moment before nodding solemnly. "Okay, I'll be kind too." My heart swelled with pride as I kissed her forehead. "I know you will, Lily." As I closed the door to her room, I realized that life wasn't about avoiding pain or betrayal. It was about how we responded to it, how we allowed it to shape us, not define us. And in choosing to be kind, to forgive, and to move forward, I had reclaimed my story, one chapter at a time. Months turned into years, and life continued to evolve, each day bringing new challenges and joys. Sophie and I grew even closer, the kind of bond forged not just through love, but through shared trials, understanding, and a commitment to building something meaningful together. Lily flourished in ways that never ceased to amaze me. Her curious mind and compassionate heart, a constant reminder of the kind of world I wanted to nurture for her. Julia, true to her word, stayed in the periphery of my life. Every so often, I'd receive updates, a brief phone call or a holiday card. She had managed to stabilize her health and rebuild her life in small but significant ways. There was a quiet dignity in how she faced her struggles, and though she never asked for more from me than I had already given, I could sense her gratitude in every interaction. One spring afternoon, a letter arrived at our home. It was from Julia, written in her familiar looping script. I opened it slowly, curious about what she might want to share. Dear My Name, I hope this letter finds you and your family well. First, let me say thank you again for everything. I've spent a lot of time reflecting on the choices I made and the consequences they brought. And while I can never undo the pain I caused, I want you to know how much I admire the man you are. There's something I need to say. Something I've been holding on to for a long time. When we were married, I didn't fully understand what I had. I let my insecurities, my selfishness, and my need for validation blind me to the love you offered. Losing you was the wake-up call I didn't want, but desperately needed. And while I'll always carry the weight of my mistakes, I also carry the lessons they taught me. You didn't just show me kindness when I least deserved it. You showed me what it means to be a good person. I've tried to live by that example, even in small ways. I volunteer at the local shelter now, and I've made amends with some of the people I hurt along the way. It's not much, but it's a start. I don't know if I'll ever truly forgive myself for what happened between us, but I wanted you to know that I've found peace. Not because I deserve it, but because I've worked for it. And a big part of that is thanks to you. I wish you and your family all the happiness in the world. Sophie and Lily are lucky to have you, and I know you're just as lucky to have them. With gratitude, Julia, I read the letter twice, then a third time, each word sinking in like ripples on a still pond. I wasn't sure how to feel. There was a bittersweet quality to her words, a mix of sorrow and hope that tugged at something deep within me. When Sophie found me in the living room, the letter still in my hands, she raised an eyebrow. "Everything okay?" she asked, her voice gentle. I handed her the letter without a word, watching as she read it. When she finished, she folded it neatly and set it on the coffee table. "Well," she said with a small smile, "sounds like she's finally found her way." I nodded slowly. "Yeah, I think she has." Sophie leaned against the armrest beside me, her hand finding mine. "You gave her that chance, you know. Not everyone would have." "It wasn't about her," I admitted. "It was about me, about not letting anger or bitterness control who I am. I didn't want to carry that weight anymore." "And you didn't," Sophie said, squeezing my hand. "You let it go, and look where it's brought us." I looked around the room at the life we had built together. The framed photos on the walls, the toys scattered across the floor, the faint sound of Lily humming to herself in the next room. It was a life filled with love, warmth, and purpose. A life that had grown not in spite of the pain of the past, but because of it. As the evening sun cast a golden glow through the windows, I felt a deep sense of contentment. My story wasn't perfect, but it was mine. And in the end, that was more than enough. Months turned into seasons, and as time passed, life became a tapestry of laughter, challenges, and quiet contentment. Sophie and I had created a sanctuary, a place where love was nurtured, and the wounds of the past had gradually become faded scars. Though they remained as reminders, they no longer dictated the terms of my happiness. One crisp autumn morning, as golden leaves swirled around our yard, Lily came bounding into the kitchen. Her cheeks were flushed from playing outside, her laughter infectious. "Daddy, come see! I made a pile of leaves bigger than me!" Her enthusiasm was irresistible. "Bigger than you? That I've got to see," I said, setting down my coffee. Sophie smiled at us from where she was chopping vegetables for lunch, her eyes sparkling with amusement. "Don't let her rope you into jumping in," Sophie teased. "Last time you ended up with leaves in places I didn't think was possible." Lily giggled, grabbing my hand. Come on, Daddy, before the wind ruins it. Outside, the yard was a riot of color. Lily's pile of leaves was indeed impressive, almost as tall as she was. She stood proudly beside it, her hands on her hips like a tiny conqueror. Well, I said, feigning seriousness, there's only one thing to do with a pile like this. Jump in, Lily shouted, her face lighting up. I scooped her into my arms, and together we leapt into the pile, leaves flying everywhere. Her laughter filled the air, and for a moment, the world felt impossibly perfect. Later that evening, as we sat by the fire, Sophie curled up beside me on the couch while Lily dozed off in her favorite armchair. The quiet moments were some of my favorites. The crackle of the fire, the soft glow of the room, the simple peace of being together. Sophie broke the silence. You've been different lately, she said, her tone contemplative. Different? How? I asked, glancing at her. Lighter. Happier, she said, resting her head on my shoulder. It's like you finally let go of everything. I thought about her words. She wasn't wrong. Over the years, I'd carried the weight of betrayal, the sting of shattered trust, and the fear of vulnerability. But those burdens had slowly lifted, replaced by the steady rhythm of a life rebuilt on love, honesty, and resilience. I think I have, I admitted. It's not that I've forgotten everything, but it doesn't hurt like it used to. It doesn't define me anymore. Sophie smiled, her fingers tracing small patterns on my arm. I'm proud of you, for choosing to heal, for choosing us. I kissed her forehead, gratitude welling up inside me. You made it easy to choose. You and Lily, you're my home. As the fire burned low and the night deepened, I thought about how far I'd come. The pain of the past had once felt insurmountable, a shadow that threatened to consume me. But I'd learned that healing wasn't about erasing the past. It was about building something stronger in its wake. And in that moment, with Sophie beside me and Lily sleeping soundly, I knew I had done just that. My life wasn't perfect, but it was full. It was honest. It was mine. And that was more than enough. As the days flowed into weeks and the seasons shifted from autumn to winter, life continued its steady rhythm. Sophie and I had found a new balance, one where the weight of the past no longer clouded every moment. Our love had deepened, but it was no longer just about passion or romance. It was built on something more durable, trust, understanding, and the quiet joy of shared experience. But the past, as it often does, lingered in the shadows, sometimes nudging at the edges of my thoughts. It was never as sharp as before, but it still had a way of rising to the surface when I least expected it. One evening, as the snow fell gently, outside, I sat alone in the living room, my thoughts scattered. Sophie and Lily had gone to bed early, the quiet of the house wrapping around me like a blanket. The fire crackled softly, and I let my mind wander, thinking about how far we'd come. I was startled by the sound of the doorbell. It was late, too late for a casual visitor. My heart skipped a beat, unsure of who it could be. I rose from the couch, my steps slow and hesitant, and opened the door. Standing in front of me was a familiar figure, one I hadn't seen in years. My mind raced as I struggled to place him. It was Jake, the man who had once been a close friend, an old acquaintance from a time long before Sophie and I had rebuilt our life. His face was older now, and the years had etched lines into his features, but his eyes still held the same, familiar, mischievous glint. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice coming out more sharply than I intended. Jake shifted on his feet, his hands in his pockets, his posture guarded. "I needed to talk to you," he said quietly. "Talk to me? After all this time?" He nodded, a sense of regret in his expression. "I know this might be the last person you want to see, but I've been thinking a lot lately. About everything, That happened. About how I was part of it all. And I don't expect you to forgive me. But I need to say what's been on my mind for years. I took a deep breath, my mind swirling with confusion and anger. The past had been buried. Was it really worth reopening? But something in his demeanor told me this wasn't a casual visit. This was more. "Come in," I said, stepping aside reluctantly. We sat across from each other at the dining table, the firelight casting long shadows in the room. The silence stretched between us, thick with unspoken words. Finally, Jake broke it. "I never should have let it go as far as it did," he said, his voice low. "I don't even know what we were doing. I was selfish. But it wasn't just about you and Sophie. It was about me, too. I was lost. I thought I was trying to prove something. To myself, maybe. And I hurt you in the process. I hurt both of you. And I've been carrying that weight all this time." His words hit me like a punch, and yet part of me wasn't surprised. This conversation had been inevitable. The question of forgiveness, of closure, it had been hanging in the air between us for years. "I never got an apology," I said, my voice steady but edged with the years of pain I hadn't realized I still carried. "Not a real one. Not until now. I know, and I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I needed you to know. I'm sorry for everything." I met his gaze, feeling the rawness of the moment. The man who had been a part of the betrayal, who had stood by while Sophie and I's world shattered, he was here, admitting his fault, seeking redemption. "I don't know what to say," I admitted, my chest tightening. "It's hard to let go of something like that." "I understand," Jake said, his voice soft. "I don't expect anything from you. I just needed to do this for myself, to finally be honest with you. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm just asking for you to know that I regret what I did." We sat in silence, the weight of the past hanging heavily between us. I couldn't forgive him yet. Not today, not in this moment. But something inside me shifted. There was a part of me that understood his regret, understood the mess of mistakes that we all made. Finally, I stood. "I don't know where to go from here," I said, "but I can't change the past. I can only move forward." Jake nodded, standing up as well. "I'll go. I just wanted to leave you with this. And I hope someday, maybe someday, you can move on from it all." As he left, the door clicked shut behind him, and I stood there in the cold silence. The past had come to visit in the form of Jake's apology, but the damage, the betrayal, it wasn't something that could be undone with a few words. Still, there was something freeing about hearing it. And maybe that was enough for now. I walked back to the living room, the weight of the conversation still lingering in my chest. Sophie and Lily were still asleep, their peaceful faces a reminder of everything I had rebuilt. I sank into the couch, the firelight flickering in front of me, and closed my eyes for a moment. As the days passed after Jake's unexpected visit, I found myself reflecting more deeply on everything that had transpired. His apology, while surprising and deeply emotional, had opened a door within me, a door I thought I had sealed shut forever. It forced me to confront the scars I had buried, to reevaluate the walls I had built around my heart. Sophie noticed the change almost immediately. She was perceptive like that, always able to read me even when I tried to mask my thoughts. "You've been quiet," she said one evening as we sat together by the fireplace, Lily tucked into bed. Her voice was soft, careful. "Is everything okay?" I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "Jake came by," I finally said, watching her reaction. Her face froze for a moment, her eyes widening in shock. "Jake? As in, Jake?" I nodded, and she immediately shifted closer, her hand instinctively reaching for mine. "What did he want?" "To apologize," I said simply, meeting her gaze. He said he regrets everything, that he's been carrying the guilt all these years. Sophie's expression flickered with a mix of emotions, anger, guilt, and perhaps even a touch of relief. And how did you feel about that? I sighed, leaning back into the couch. I don't know. Part of me wanted to slam the door in his face. But another part of me, I don't know, Sophie. Maybe I needed to hear it. Maybe I needed to see that he wasn't as invincible as I thought. That he was human, too, with regrets and flaws. She was silent for a long moment, her hand gripping mine tightly. I didn't think he'd ever have the courage to face you. Or me, for that matter. Neither did I admitted. But it made me think about forgiveness, about how much I've held on to over the years, and whether it's worth it. Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears, and she leaned her head against my shoulder. You've been stronger than I could have ever hoped for, she whispered. You've given me more grace than I deserved. I don't know if I would have had the same strength if the roles were reversed. I placed a gentle kiss on her forehead. It wasn't just strength, Sophie. It was a choice. A choice to try again, to rebuild, even when it felt impossible. Sat there in comfortable silence, the warmth of the fire enveloping us. In that moment, I realized something profound. Forgiveness wasn't about letting others off the hook. It was about freeing myself from the weight of anger and pain. It didn't mean forgetting or excusing what had happened. It meant choosing not to let it define me anymore. In the weeks that followed, life continued to move forward. The past would always be a part of our story, but it no longer held the power it once did. I found myself laughing more, enjoying the simple moments with Sophie and Lily, and slowly but surely, I began to let go of the bitterness I had carried for so long. One day, while walking through the park with Lily, she tugged on my hand and looked up at me with her big, curious eyes. Daddy, why do you smile so much now? Her innocent question caught me off guard, and I crouched down to her level, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Because I'm happy, sweetheart. Because I have you and Mommy, and that's all I need. She grinned, throwing her arms around my neck. I love you, Daddy. I love you too, I whispered, holding her close. In that moment, I knew I had truly found my way back to the light. The road had been long and painful, filled with heartbreak and betrayal, but it had also led me to a deeper understanding of myself, of love, and of the resilience of the human spirit. And for the first time in years, I felt whole. Not because everything was perfect, but because I had chosen to heal, to let go of the past, and embrace the future with open arms.